This is episode number 145, featuring Matt Ryder, the first artist you've ever met who does plein air painting in the deserts around Dubai.
This is the PleinAir Podcast with Eric Rhoads, publisher and founder of PleinAir Magazine. In the PleinAir Podcast, we cover the world of outdoor painting. Called plein air, the French coined the term, which means open air or outdoors. The French pronounce it plein air. Others say plein air. No matter how you say it, there is a huge movement of artists around the world who are going outdoors to paint. And this show is about that movement. Now, here's your host, author, publisher, and painter, Eric Rhoads.
Thank you, Jim Kipping, and welcome to the PleinAir Podcast. My name is Eric, and this weekend I'm off. I'm going to be flying to France to meet up with friends to paint in the south of France in a little village called Saint-Paul-de-Vence for a few days. And then we join up with our annual fine art trip from Fine Art Connoisseur, where we go behind the scenes and see art in ways that other people just never get a chance to. So I'm pretty excited about that. Thanks to all the folks that are coming along on that. Got about, 48 or 50 of us, I think. And just super excited. This is the 10th year we've done this. We've done cruises. We've visited all over Europe. It's really a lot of fun. And then as soon as I get back, about a month from my return, we're going to have the Big Face Conference in Williamsburg, which is going to be a lot of fun if you like to experiment with or learn about or want to understand more about figurative and portrait painting and drawing. Got all the great masters there, just like the Plein Air Convention, only figure and portrait drawing. So a lot of people from the Plein Air Convention actually coming. I think there's over 80 of them who are registered, which is pretty cool. Thank you for that. If you want to see the superstars of figurative and portrait, the people who are focusing on what I call museum quality art, the things that are a little bit more interesting, a little bit more refined. That's what this is all about. And it's a place to come and get to know the other folks, get to know your tribe, learn from the great masters. Also, I do art marketing there. And that's at Williamsburg, Virginia. First time we've taken it to the east. We had it in the east in Miami, I guess, but the what would you call that? The middle? No, it's not the Middle East. Mid-America, I suppose. I know you're probably pounding the dashboard going, what is this guy talking about? Anyway, that's it. Can be learned more about that at figurativeartconvention.com. Coming up after the interview, I'm going to be taking some art marketing questions in the Marketing Minute. But today we're going to talk about Dubai and the UAE and the deserts and what it's like to paint there and the plein air movement. Is there one? You'll learn more about that soon. Let's get right to our interview with Matt Ryder. Matt Ryder, welcome to the PleinAir Podcast.
Thank you, Eric. I'm very happy to be here.
Well, and I understand this is a first for the PleinAir Podcast. This is the first time we've recorded anybody in Dubai.
That's good to know. That's good to know.
So you're there's a pretty big difference in time from where we are at the present. So I'm going to talk about Dubai in a little bit, but I want to kind of start out. First off, I'm a big admirer of your work. I think it's just fabulous, and I think that a lot of people were going to be aware of you now that may not have had a chance to see your work yet, and it's remarkable. How did this all begin for you?
Well, thank you. First off, the plein air thing is relatively new to me, really. I've been drawing and painting all my life, but it was only when I came to Dubai that the landscapes really kind of took over what I was working on, and then discovered plein air. My work has just changed completely since then.
So how has it changed? What's that been all about?
So when I started out, I was doing illustration work mainly, some cartooning, some stuff for magazines, some live event work, this sort of thing. And then, it's just really developed over time into, I'd never painted in oil up until around 5 years ago. I was always working digitally and using different mediums. But when I started with oil, I was doing some like animal portraits, this sort of thing. And then, like I said, it was only when I discovered the landscapes which were surrounding me here that I thought I would try to actually go outdoors and try something new.
So it seems counterintuitive. Plein air painting obviously makes sense, but plein air painting in the desert in the heat seems like you'd want to go out in a nice air-conditioned vehicle and then take a couple of photographs. So applause to you for braving it out. What do you have to do to be able to paint in those kind of conditions?
I mean, firstly, half of the year is completely written off. So there's an awful lot of studio work that happens here as well. But the way that I treat plein air painting is I'm really taking, instead of photographic reference, I'm taking color studies, which I then bring into the studio and work over the summer. But yeah, I mean, it's from October, the season really starts for me, where I can get outside. So I'll go out in my Jeep, load up with my gear. There's not too much really within Dubai in terms of the landscapes that I'm painting, which are mainly, mountains, wadis, canyons, this sort of thing. So I'm getting up early. I'm heading out, driving for 2-3 hours, getting up to the mountains. And now I've been doing it for a while, so I know some of the best routes. So I park up, I hike, I take my gear, and I get around 2 hours before the heat just gets too much. So I'm doing these quick studies. Sometimes I'll hang around for the day and go and grab some lunch somewhere and then do another painting much later in the afternoon. But one thing here is the sun comes up very, very quickly, and it also goes down very quickly. So you have short windows of time, which if you look through my work, you'll see that a lot of it is early morning light and evening light, because really those are the best times to paint here.
So I'm just curious, the temperatures when you start out painting, what kind of temperatures are you experiencing when it's what you would consider to be cooler, and then what is the temperature swing by the time it just becomes almost unbearable to paint?
So this time of year, it's still getting up to around 100, 105 degrees, so it's still really pretty hot, and that would be around midday. So early morning, it's still, we're still talking around kind of 90, 95. So I wouldn't be going out now, but within the next month or so, we're talking in the mornings, it'll be, especially up in the mountains, it will go down to around kind of 70, 75 for a couple of hours. And then once it starts to peak back up, the hottest it'll get in the winter is around 100, which when you're dealing with summers, which are 120 or so, with and 80, 90% humidity, that's pretty pleasant painting.
So in terms of dealing with that kind of heat, whenever you're out, what do you have to dress differently? Obviously, you have to dress appropriately. What's that like?
Yeah, I mean it's summer gear all the way, really. It's I obviously wear a hat, lots of sun cream. I take gallons of water out with me. I mean, the thing is, like when I'm hiking, and a lot of these trips I'm doing on my own as well, so I need to be fully aware of what I'm doing and make sure that I can carry enough water with me and my electrolytes and everything else. But wearing shorts it's not really an option either, so you have to just wear kind of lightweight gear, of course a hat, and just plenty of prep to keep myself safe.
So those of us over here who may not be familiar, who may not have attended or visited that area, are a little intimidated by it because of things that we may hear on the news media and so on. Do you ever, as a non-local, although you've lived there for years now, do you ever feel unsafe, or do you ever feel as though you have to be on guard all the time?
Not at all. I mean, in the sense of the elements that I'm competing with, yes, absolutely. But as far as the region, the UAE, it's incredibly safe, given the region that we're in. I'm always incredibly welcomed, even in the small villages which would not have any kind of Western culture in them at all. They're still very welcoming, and they don't have a clue what this guy with a beard and tattoos is doing standing in the middle of the desert painting them. But, they're inquisitive. They don't speak any English, but they'll always kind of try and make me feel welcome wherever I am. And then within Dubai itself and Abu Dhabi and the bigger Emirates, I mean, it's as Western as the Middle East can be here. You know, it's made up of 80% expats. So it's incredibly safe.
So 80% expats from all over the world, I assume. So Yeah. So I'm curious about, a lot of painters will paint areas that are being developed or about to be developed to be able to preserve what they were like. Your area has been in a super development mode now for probably 20 or 30 years, maybe longer. And have you gone out and tried to preserve some of those areas that are about to be developed, or is the landscape around there more flat and less interesting? I've never been.
So I really, it's part of what I'm doing. I'm trying to keep a visual record. I mean, it can of course be done with photography, but I'm trying to keep an original record of what the region looks like in an unspoiled state. So I mean, Dubai itself, the development within the city has been, it's incredible how quickly it's grown. I mean, I've been here for 12 years, and there's cities within the city that just didn't exist when I was here. But I'm not, what I'm painting isn't within the city. So what I'm doing is I'm going out a little bit further to the places that are a little less developed. But even those are changing. There's so much mining that's going on, and there's obviously hotels are being built within some of these high beauty areas for obvious reasons. They're trying to capture the tourists to see what the place looks like. So I'm getting those spots now before they disappear and they change forever. And also, I mean, there's so many expats, including myself, when I came here, that didn't know that these areas existed. So a lot of what I'm doing is kind of sharing with the people that live here these incredible places of beauty. I always keep GPS coordinates if anyone's asking me where they are specifically, and sharing those with the people that live here as well, so they can experience these places that I'm seeing.
Now, do you make your living full-time as an artist?
I do indeed. So I have a few strings to my bow, so to speak. The main bulk of what I'm doing is painting, but I still do illustration work. I still do some live illustration, live painting at events, this sort of thing. But the bulk of what I'm doing now, thankfully, is landscape painting, seascape painting. I'm working with hotels, commissioning work for hotels, that sort of thing.
Well, that was going to be my next question: is who are you selling your artwork to? So, do you have art shows locally? Are you taking some of your work to other cities, to within the region or outside of the region? So the art scene here is it's still developing. As the city is evolving, so is the art scene. So there are certain districts. There's one particular area called Al Sakal Avenue, which is it's almost like a warehouse district, and there's about, I think it's 15 galleries there or so, mainly showing kind of conceptual work, some abstract work, very little in the way of realism, and certainly landscape. But again, that is changing. So I had my first solo show last year within that gallery district, and it was really the first time that a show like this had been seen here within that area anyway. So I'm selling work through a gallery there, and then also I work with some interior design companies here who commission specific hotels for artwork for their lobbies, for their restaurants, this sort of thing. So it's pretty diverse, but it's opening up. Let's put it that way. What is the size of the community there? Do you have any stats?
The artist community it's relatively small. The things here that make it a little difficult to go full time as an artist. So a lot of the community is made up of artists who have full time jobs. So they'll be working maybe as a graphic designer and illustrator for a company, and then they paint on the side. So yeah, it's not huge, the actual artist community, but I'd say it is growing. And as far as like the PleinAir community, I'm as far as I'm aware, I'm pretty much it. So it is growing. Like I am teaching workshops. I am getting people to get involved. But there's really very few people here who are doing it.
Well, as you know, we are enlisting people into the PleinAir Force so that we can get more people painting around the world. So I'm glad to see you starting to open that door, do some workshops, and look for some ways that you can expose PleinAir painting to that community. I think
it's hard to convince people to get out in the middle of the day with me, but we're getting there.
Yeah, well, I can understand that. It seems like a challenge, especially certain times of year. I mean, here in Austin, Texas, a 100-degree day is certainly not unusual, but that's kind of a cool day for you.
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be jeans on and maybe grab the jacket.
So, tell me about your workshops. You have do you have a lot of students? Very few. What's that story?
So the workshops I started doing last year. So the first one I did was it was a 2-day workshop, kind of like a little experience trip to an area called Fujairah. So Fujairah is one of the other Emirates, and it has beautiful mountains, which is the Hajar mountain range, which spread through Oman and then through to the UAE. And then it's coastal as well, so you do get some fairly spectacular coastal areas as well. So I split it into 2 days. I did mountain painting on the 1 day, and then coastal painting on the 2nd day. And as I say, it was my first one of these, so I wasn't too sure what the response would be. So I had 12 spaces, and it filled within a week of advertising for the workshop. And it was, everyone needed to get their own equipment. You know, it was they had to fully commit to it, you know, stay in a hotel, do the whole work. So the 12 who came they were brilliant. Some had never painted before. They'd literally gone out and bought all of the gear, all of the kit, posh aid boxes, you know, the works. But thankfully they were obviously learning on the job effectively. But they're now, you know, I go out with them fairly regularly now as well. Well, some of the group anyway.
Now, I know this, I'm going to sound like a Luddite because obviously you're in a big city, and I would imagine everything you can get in any big city you can get there. Art materials and supplies readily available, I assume?
They are. We are limited to what we get. So there's, I mean, as far as like the brushes and the panels that I'm using, I do order those in. There isn't the quality here that I like to work with. But as far as general canvas and linen to work on, if you're not specific about the brand of paint that you're using, everything is available. There's some pretty big stores here. It is expensive. You know, the prices do seem to be a little higher than they would be elsewhere, but obviously everything can be shipped here, so it's not a major issue. So
everything gets ordered online, it sounds like, for you.
For me, yeah, because I get through an awful lot. And I'm quite particular about the materials that I use. And once I find something I like, I do tend to stick with it. So, yeah, I order quite a bit to get delivered here.
So I'm curious, you were living where before you moved over to Dubai?
So before I moved over, I actually moved in 2005, and I was living in the UK. And then I was out here for 5 years. And then I met my wife here, who's Irish, and we moved to Ireland for 2 years. And then both of us we weren't quite ready to settle back into that weather. So we made the decision and came back to Dubai. And now we're here another 7 years this time.
And what was the original driver to take you there?
It was work. So when I first came out here, I wasn't really doing too much in the way of painting. I was actually working in a completely different industry. I was working in recruitment, and it was construction specifically. And obviously there's a huge demand for construction professionals out here, so it made sense for me to come out here. So that's what I was doing at that stage. And then slowly but surely, my life just completely changed as to what I was doing. aided by the recession, which hit, and of course, everyone needed to make some decisions then. So yeah, I made the decision to move from working in an office to sitting out in the desert for hours at a time.
I'm curious about the expats who come over. I lived in a city one time that attracted a lot of people, but they'd stay a couple of years, and because of a local problem, which I won't get into, a lot of people kind of came and then left. Is Dubai a place where once people come, they fall in love with it and want to stay, or is it, they stay there because it's an opportunity to make really great money fast, or is that a rumor? I don't know. I've heard these stories, but again, I've never experienced it.
Yeah, it's a mixed bag, to be honest, Eric. I mean, it's if you have the right mindset and you're out here really to save money, you can. The wages do tend to be higher. There are opportunities for people out here. So there's definitely a chance to save money, to take home. But as far as living out here long term, there's not too many people who would stay more than kind of 2, 3, 4 years, because it is it's a transient city. But I think now there's more and more people who are staying longer, because obviously the economy's back wherever they may have come from, aren't necessarily doing so well. So, while things are going well here, why go back, unless there's a very specific reason you need to leave. So I think a lot more people now are staying a little longer.
Well, everybody who leaves takes their paintings with them, and then everybody who comes in needs paintings for their walls, and so it's a beautiful thing, right?
That's right, yeah. That's right.
So I'm curious, you kind of discovered plein air painting on your own. You decided you were a studio painter and an illustrator, and once you got to Dubai, from what you said, you decided to go out and paint outdoors. Where did this idea come from for you? Was the idea of just the outdoors were calling you to try it in person, or what was it that drove that?
There's a few things behind it. I mean, I guess the main driving force was I was looking at other people's work, and it was blowing my mind as to how they were getting the color and this kind of sense of light, which I hadn't seen before. I was looking at paintings from, I was painting a lot of seascapes at the time, so I was looking at Winslow Homer and Project Judd War, and then looking at obviously the work of Edgar Payne, which if you see my work is definitely an influence there. And then I just couldn't really understand, like I said, how they were doing it. And then of course, the more I looked into it, realized that they were going outdoors. So I was looking into who's painting outdoors now. And then of course, this whole world opened up. I mean, I found the podcast, I found the convention, I found all these painters who were just going outdoors and painting. I was like, okay, yeah, I can do this. I didn't have any clue what to take with me, so I bought, I only had studio easel at the time, so I went out and bought pretty much the heaviest field easel I could find, which is the only one I could find at the time, which was a big French easel, and then literally loaded up with everything from my studio. I think I had practically the kitchen table come out with me. And yeah, that was it. Once I completely failed my first plein air painting, I was hooked.
Well, that's what it takes. I remember taking my first time plein air painting. I literally dragged a full-size studio easel outside and a chair and a table and a couple of boxes. So it's not unusual, learning to do that. And then where did you learn about things like pochade boxes and the things that the pros in the plein air world are using? Did you find that just by kind of searching around on Google, or what was the story there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely a big Googler. Once I get an idea in my head, I do tend to run with it. I'll find out literally every scrap of information I can about something, and then find the best thing I can and go from there. But I'll tell you what really did kind of open my eyes to what people were doing and what equipment was readily available, etc. Was when I went to Ireland and went to the Art in the Open festival, which I think you had the guys on the podcast fairly recently.
Yep.
But that was my first experience of painting with other people. a friend of mine here, actually, strangely enough, had recommended that I look into it. And it tied in well with a trip that I had back with my wife to see her family. So I went and did the festival, literally only having painted outside maybe 2 or 3 times here in Dubai. And I was blown away. I mean, I think it was maybe 150, 160 artists there, all different levels. But I didn't know at that time what really could be done within such a short period of time. So, yeah, I mean, as far as trips go, that one pretty much changed my life and made me realize that I could do it professionally. I met so many people who were doing it full time, just traveling around doing plein air paintings and nothing else, not even studio work. They were living off their plein air work. So it blew my mind, Eric, honestly. Like, I was just standing there in awe of everybody. And then I came back here with just this renewed sense of what I wanted to do and how I could go around doing that.
So have you had any desire to be part of any of the this what I call the circuit, the painters who are going from event to event here in the States? And, there's some of that going around, starting to happen more in the UK now, but much more so here. Any desire to do that?
Absolutely. I mean, it's obviously very difficult from here. I see these big events that come up, and I mean, one in particular that came up recently was the Grand Canyon event, the celebration of, I look at this, I know it's invitational, but it's just, what a dream to be able to go there with so many other painters.
Well, of course you paint a lot of rocks and a lot of the same colors. So
I know, right?
Sense.
That's kind of what caught my eye with it, I think. But yeah, I mean, that's almost why I'm doing these workshops and trying to build this community here as well. Because if there's enough of us, then potentially we can look at doing something like some kind of festival here, where potentially, we could bring people over. There's not enough artists here at the moment to do anything like that. So, yeah, I do look. I look on in awe as to what's going on. To start
a community, the first thing is to just get people painting. If you can just find a way to kind of put the word out that you're doing some painting lessons, so you don't have to start them out on plein air painting, and then once they get to a point where you feel like they're ready for it, maybe they'll go out with you, and then you can begin a plein air community, get together once a week, like a lot of other cities do, and before you know it, one person will tell another, and you'll have 30, 50 people, and maybe a couple hundred before long.
That's the plan. Yeah, I mean, even with the workshops, you can see that it's there are people who are signing up for each of the workshops because they don't have these other opportunities to really go out on an organized trip. So they're coming along, and they're coming on each one, and they're bringing friends along. So it's incredible. Things are definitely happening here. So and with the galleries as well, once they're seeing more and more people are going out, and they're also seeing this work up on their walls, it's changing the face of galleries here as well.
Well, it certainly would be worth getting all the galleries together in town and having a little lunch and talking to them about what's happening in the plein air movement around the world and how they could become a part of that and capture that. Of course, that's something we should all be doing is getting people more educated. So, Matt, I'm curious, when you started plein air painting, you didn't know anything about it. You took your studio easel and a table and a chair out to paint outside. What are the things that you can maybe help somebody with that you went through that maybe somebody's listening right now and they're thinking, well, I've never done this plein air thing. How can I be best prepared? What should I expect that I perhaps would not have anticipated? And what's the best way to kind of get used to it and overcome the obstacles?
Well, I think the first thing anyone needs to really remember when they're first starting out in plein air is to have a good sense of humor and be able to not take everything quite so seriously. If you do lose a brush to the sea, or your painting happens to fall face down in the desert, you can do nothing but laugh about it, really, because these things are going to happen. But the more you go out, the more you're going to be you're going to get better at it. You're going to get better at the setup. Your pack is going to get lighter. The more and more times you go out, of course, things get easier. I think like some of the things that I did very quickly, as far as like trimming down my pack, I certainly came up with a palette, so I used to just lay out pretty much every color that I had on my palette. And so often none of them, maybe half of them would have been used. So I trimmed down the amount of color which I was actually taking out with me. And then as far as the panels go, I went from working on bigger canvas to trimming down to the panels. And then for PleinAir, I was generally only working on one size. So I had a panel carrier, which took one specific size out with me. I trimmed down the amount of brushes I was taking out. I, of course, invested in a better pochette box. And actually one of the main things was I got a better tripod. So the tripod, I think, is just as important as the actual box itself. I've been out with a few painters who've got the most expensive boxes on top of the flimsiest tripods, and it's just bouncing around all over the place. And it's just a complete waste of money to have this great bit of kit on this effectively flagpole, it's just waving around. So I think it's very important to get a sturdy, solid kit. Where I am, it gets very windy, so I have to weigh the kit down. So I always put my paints back into my backpack along with, any kind of extra stuff. Sometimes put a couple of rocks in there. I have a hook on my tripod, so get the bag hooked on. That was a lesson that I only learned from my tripod blowing over. It's just, they're just things that you pick up kind of along the way, for sure.
Well, that's the quest. That's what we go through. We have to learn those lessons the hard way until we figure it out. And of course, it's nice being with other people too. I'm sure your eyes were open to other possibilities when you went to Ireland and you saw all these different people using all these different kinds of easels and panels and brushes and brush clips and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. It's very good for the guys selling art equipment. That's for sure.
Yeah. So, what's the future look like for you? You going to stay in Dubai? You're going to move elsewhere? What are you going to do?
I'm definitely going to be here for the foreseeable future. So we're 12 years here now. We had a daughter a couple of years ago, so she's just started nursery, so she'll be going to school soon. So we don't want to obviously disrupt her life too much at this stage. And things are going well. So there's, as I say before, if things are going well, it doesn't seem like there's any good reason to step away. And also, I'm invested in building this community and this brand which I'm developing. And to leave now would basically just I'd need to start again somewhere else, So well, it's we're going to be here for a while, I think.
What a great opportunity when you really think about it. It sounds like you're on the ground floor. That there's not a big artist community. There's not a lot of art taking place, and so you have. Imagine being in one of the first artists in a big city like Chicago or New York or Los Angeles or something. This is a huge opportunity, I see it as a guy who teaches marketing as a huge marketing opportunity, and there's nowhere to go but up.
That's it. I mean, it is an incredible opportunity to be here, doing what I'm doing at this time. As I say, it is it's ground floor, so there isn't any other way to go. So it's great. It's a good time to be here.
Well, maybe one day if I can find some brave people, anybody might be interested in this, give me a holler, and maybe we'll see if we can get a group of 20, 30, 40, 50 people to come over, and you'll show us Dubai, and we'll go out painting. And of course, we have to go in the winter because we're not gonna stand out there and paint in 120 degree heat.
Yeah, you won't find me here in the summer. So I think come any time between. Really, the best times are from November through to around March. The weather's incredible. It doesn't get much better than that. I'd say I'll start getting out again next month. But yeah, it's still fairly toasty. But you would be most welcome, and I would most certainly happily show you guys the scenes and the best places to paint. Sure.
Well, and I'm sorry to say that the PleinAir convention kind of falls right at the edge of your season, but hope you'll come over one day, and everybody I'm sure would love to get to know you. Matt, do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I would just like to say that I had a little list of things which which I had written down, but I think the best bit of advice I can give to people is firstly, just know how lucky you are to be doing what you're doing, and just be professional and get everything done on time. Respond to your emails and improve that community. But yeah, it's a good time to be an artist, I think.
Well, you're part of a movement. This is, according to Jean Stern, the art historian at the Irvine Museum in California, this is the largest movement in the history of art. And what does my heart good is to hear things like you started learning about PleinAir, you heard about it on the podcast, et cetera, and we're seeing this spread. If I look at the stats on where people are listening to the podcast, it's literally all over the world. I mean, just about every country you can imagine, and some I've never even heard of. And so it's fun to see this thing blossoming and see people around the world. And the goal here is to create a community. In the United States, you could go to one of our websites and find a list of artists in most any community. And if you were, let's say you were visiting Austin, Texas, where I live, you could probably find a lot of us here and just say, hey, I'd like to find somebody to paint locally with, and we can take you out to all the spots, kind of a thing. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we get that going on a worldwide basis, where somebody's visiting Dubai and they go, hey, let's go painting. So I think that's fabulous, and the more we can get this community together and participating. Of course, we really try to get to know each other at the conventions, because that's a great opportunity. We all see each other on social media, Instagram and Facebook, but to sit down with somebody face to face at the dinner table or the bar or something, it makes a completely different experience. And then I can't tell you how many people have told me they met somebody at something like Fall Color Week, and now they're hanging out with them. They go visit them. Rick Wilson, who comes to almost every Fall Color Week, said that he was in Washington D.C. and he called one of the people from Fall Color Week, and they hosted him. They had a place to stay. They had, they got to go out painting and sightseeing together, and it's a beautiful world when you can connect as part of the community. And I would encourage you to try and make that happen in Dubai and build a community there. And of course, everybody listening, build a community where you are.
Absolutely. And funnily enough, there's actually a gentleman from the States who I met on a workshop a few weeks ago. I was in the UK. I took a workshop with Casey Barr through Rosary Co. And there's an American artist there who's on an 8-hour stopover coming through Dubai next week. So I'm going to meet up with him and show him a couple of spots while he's here. So it is
outstanding.
There's a perfect example of that artist community just blossoming. So it's incredible. And I think what you're doing, bringing everyone together, it's amazing. Like I said, I've learned so much about the PleinAir world through listening to the podcast and reading the magazine. And isn't that amazing that I now have an opportunity to have a chat with you? And it's brilliant. Could I ask for more? Not at this stage, I don't think.
Well, thank you very much for that. That's always nice. Casey Baugh, you mentioned, I noticed you're using his easel. He's such a giving guy and so generous. And he's going to be coming back and teaching at our Figurative Art Convention and Expo coming up in early November. And also a good thing to spread the word to your friends out there about, because, they learning to paint, the figure is part of learning to paint and a part of the process. And so I noticed on your website you do a lot of portraits and figures and things like that. So congratulations on that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, the workshop that I took was a figure in the landscape workshop. So it's definitely, I obviously thoroughly enjoy painting the landscapes and the seascapes, but it's something that I want to really explore more, is moving into putting that figure, within a physical space. So I've done a lot of portraits, but not so much figurative work. So it's really interesting to obviously learn with a master of what they're doing. And this is something else that I would encourage anybody else to do, is study with the best people that you can possibly afford to study with. The first workshop I ever took was a Jeremy lifting workshop. I don't see any point for myself at this stage in taking workshops with anyone that I don't see as being, absolute top of what they're doing, because that's where I want to be. So study with the best if you can afford it, and that's the way to learn quickly as well, I think.
That's what they say. They say average people try to figure things out on their own. Above average people try to figure out the mistakes of others, and exceptional people try to figure out the mistakes of others and go to the people who are the very best. So congratulations on that. I actually have signed up for a Jeremy Lipking workshop in April myself, so I'm looking forward to it. And I've painted with Jeremy many times, but to actually take a workshop, I'm looking forward to that. So that's pretty cool, and I'm glad you did it. And you're right, learning with the best of the best really makes a difference. That's why I do these conferences. I try to pull in the very best people that people are really interested in at the time, either at the plein air or the figurative conventions. And we can't figure it out. We're all isolated. We're in our studios. We're trying to figure things out on our own, and sometimes just a single aha moment at one of these events will change your life.
Absolutely. I mean, there's certain things that come up on these workshops that you think maybe, okay, well, I know this, or I know roughly how I'm going to approach this, and then there'll just be one snippet of information, and it just completely changes the way that you may work or the way that you look at a subject. And I mean, even with Casey and Jeremy, they had completely different ways of teaching and just different subject matters that we were doing. But I took so much from each of those, and it's incredible to be able to have that opportunity to study with people who, they're true masters of our time.
It's really important to have that variety because somebody can go to a really great art school and learn a particular way, and maybe it's studying under somebody at one of the ateliers, and you kind of learn their way, and you spend 3 or 4 or 5 years learning their way. But sometimes you can't solve every problem with that, and the idea of saying, okay, well, I'll study with Jeremy, I'll study with Casey, I'll study with somebody else, I think that kind of thing really expands you. I don't recommend doing too much of it at once because it can make your head spin. Although the ability to kind of see, you get to watch a few different people at one time, that gives you the ability to go, oh yeah, that's the way I want to do it. That's the style I'd like to do. I don't want to copy them, but I want to get their style.
Yeah, and I think, for me as well, because I don't see really any other painters here. I never get to sit and paint with anybody. So as much of the joy I got from listening to these guys talk, just watching how they would approach the painting and certain brush strokes they would use, that's all. I pick so much up from books, but until you actually see that brush physically go down on canvas, I was learning these things that I didn't even know were possible. So and hopefully I'm applying this to my work, whether it's figurative. I'm still applying those lessons to painting, within a wadi or a mountain, some epic scene. There's still certain things you can take from painting a face to putting into a landscape or a seascape. It's all just painting things. So it's there's lessons everywhere to be had, I think.
Absolutely. Well, Matt, what's the website people can find your work?
So my website is riderscanvas.com. So it's Riders with a Y. And then Instagram, which is my most commonly updated, is just at Matt Ryder.
Well, thank you so much. It's been fun to learn about you and your experiences in Dubai, and I think we'll come over and see you sometime, and certainly we hope you'll come over and see us.
I certainly hope so. So, let's keep in touch.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric.
Well, thanks again to Matt Ryder, and I'm thinking we should probably all head over there together at some time. So check that out. It might be kind of fun. Seems a little hot to me, but maybe get some air-conditioned hats or something. I don't know. Anyway, ready for some marketing ideas?
This is the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhoads, author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Make More Money Selling Your Art, Proven Techniques to Turn Your Passion into Profit.
In the Marketing Minute, I try to answer your marketing questions from our audience. Well, that's you, right? Email your questions to me, eric@pleinairmagazine.com, or you can message me, text me, whatever you want to do. I write them down, then I use them in here. Here's a question from Dwayne in New York. I don't know his last name, but Dwayne, thank you. Dwayne says, I've heard you mention visualizing your success. Can you speak more to that? I'm not really sure what that means or how to start. Well, Dwayne, it's really nothing new, certainly not new. It's been going on for a long time. Let's start with the basic premise. What is in your head controls everything. Is your stomach ever turned into knots from worry or stress? Well, that's coming from your head. You're worrying, right? The premise is that you want to control what's in your head. You want to control your thinking. You want to control the negative thoughts and push them out. And you also want to get the positive thoughts and the things that you believe could be happening in there and think about them a lot. So that's why it's a good idea to set goals. It's a good idea to read those goals on a regular basis and to believe that you can do it. So you have to believe something before it can happen. And I think you need to dream it or at least think about it a lot to manifest it. Now, most people think that's kind of a silly idea. And quite frankly, I used to think so too. But when you think about it, most of the things that we have made happen one way or the other have been because we've been thinking about them. And, by the way, a lot of the bad things that we sit and ruminate about end up happening. Why does that happen? I'll tell you a story. 30 years ago, maybe longer than that, I was exposed to this concept. And somebody said, create a poster with pictures of what you want, things you want, houses and cars, but also pictures that stand for things you want, like family or love. It's called a visualization board. And the idea is to look at it every day and imagine yourself doing it. Well, I thought it was crazy, hocus pocus, woo-woo stuff. But I thought, well, what the heck? Everybody's telling me it works. I'll try it. And I really wanted a Porsche. Yep. But I couldn't afford one. I didn't have the money. I had no way to get the money. I had a small, relatively struggling business. And so I cut out a Porsche. I didn't do the whole board, but I cut out a Porsche. And I stuck it on the mirror in the bathroom so I'd see it morning and night. And before long, I was kind of imagining myself in it. You want these things to be vivid. What color is it? What's it like on the interior? That kind of a thing. And so I finally told myself, maybe the way to get it is I could sell my business. And I kind of wanted to do that anyway. And I would reward myself if I got a certain price for my business. So anyway, I had no prospects. As a matter of fact, I wasn't even considering it before that. But a year later, after looking at that picture every day, I sold my business, I put money in the bank, and I bought that exact Porsche. I mean, it was the same color, the same model, everything that I had looked at. And interesting, it kind of came to me. In other words, I was kind of looking, but all of a sudden this guy contacted me, said, I hear you're looking for a Porsche. I've got one. I don't know if it's what you're looking for or not. And he sends me a picture, and it's like, that's it. So I went over, drove over, ended up buying it. It was a used one. I didn't buy a new one, but it was pretty cool. And anyway, it's something that I had visualized. So I've kind of learned that that's a cool thing to do. I visualized the Plein Air convention. I visualized PleinAir magazine. People told me it wasn't possible, but I just kind of pushed that out of my head, got the negatives out, and said, you know what, it is possible. I've visualized this big growing Plein Air movement. That's happening. And so there's so many things that can be impacted. It's like it sets the tone and makes you work towards it, something that you kind of are doing without realizing it because you start believing it. Maybe in the beginning you don't believe it, but you start looking at that picture, you start thinking about these things. Next thing you know, you're starting to believe it. So for the last year, for instance, I've been imagining myself going to China on a painting trip and imagining that maybe somebody would pay my way. Wouldn't that be cool? Well, that's not even, I guess, about a year. And I get a call today from this guy, and he says, we want to bring you to China. I thought, how cool is that? So when I'm driving to a meeting, I imagine exactly how the conversation is going to go, how things will work out positively, and it usually happens. And I even imagined myself getting a national TV show, and I bought into it so big I could totally imagine myself doing it, getting on a major network. And within 2 weeks, I accidentally, kid you not, met this man. I said, what do you do for a living? He says, well, I'm a guy with this network. I can't tell you which one yet. But anyway, I said, well, I've got this idea for a show. And I told him the idea. He says, let's have a meeting on Monday. And then the meeting happened with his executives. And guess what I got? I got a deal. So that's how this stuff works. And I really strongly believe it works. It just sounds so illogical, and I don't understand it. I have no idea. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes and, the brainwaves or spiritual or otherwise, but it's a pretty cool thing. So if you visualize bad things, they happen too. So I try to push bad out of my head. We all have negative thoughts, and I'll tell myself, it's not like me to think that, and I'll just push it away. So anyway, that's what visualization means. Now, the next question comes from Carol from the Gulf Shore of Alabama with a banjo on her knee. I'm sorry, Carol, I had to do it. She says, when I see the work of amazing artists, I feel like I'll never be that good. How does one get past the inevitable comparisons we make to other artists? Carol, stop it. Stop comparing yourselves to others, not just in your artwork, but in everything. Focus on yourself being the best you can be. Will you or I ever be as good as John Singer Sargent, the great master? I mean, how many really great masters are there really? We're probably not going to be that good. I mean, he had something special that most of us don't have. I don't want to be a negative thinker about that, but I also am being practical. He was a rarity, but we can still be great painters or good painters, and maybe one day great painters. So you might be comparing yourself to someone who's been painting for 50 years and has lots of experience, but who started out just like you, struggling. You don't know. You don't know what they went through, their struggles, their frustrations, who was teaching them, the thousands of hours they put in. You just don't want to compare. You don't necessarily want to go through what they went through. My dad once told me, son, somebody's always got a bigger boat. In other words, no matter how good, how successful, how rich, how famous, how talented, there's always somebody who has done more. You simply can't get caught up in the comparison game. All you can do is study, work hard, put in the time, believe in yourself, get great mentors, and be happy with your progress. And a great way to do that is to look in reverse. What I mean by that is look how far you've come. Look at what you're doing today compared to what you were doing 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Sometimes I think, well, I really wish I had a better house or a better car. And then I look back and I say, wow, look at what I've got compared to what I had 20, 30, 40 years ago. I mean, I had nothing. I lived in a crummy little apartment, little tiny, what do they call that, studio apartment? I just did not dig it at all. And I thought, I'll never get out of there. And now I live in a nice house, and it's not a big giant mansion or anything like that, but I look back and I go, wow, this is a big improvement. So don't compare yourself to others. It just doesn't do any good. Get that out of your head. Stop playing that game. Be grateful for where you are and what you've got, and just continue to work hard. Anyway, that's the Marketing Minute. I hope it helps.
This has been the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhoads. You can learn more at artmarketing.com.
Be sure to check out the Figurative Art Convention at figurativeartconvention.com. We call it the FACE Conference. And if you're not registered yet for the PleinAir Convention, you want to get it done, it's going to be a big one, a doozy. That's what my grandmother used to say. That's a doozy. By the way, November 29th is the deadline on the current price for the PleinAir Convention. We always get a mad rush right before the price increases. Also, if you've not seen my blog on Sunday mornings, it's kind of a philosophy thing. It's called Sunday Coffee. And if you haven't got it, nobody's sending it to you, you're not subscribed, you can find it for free, coffeewitheric.com. And share it with your friends if you get it and you like it. It always helps. Always fun to do this. We'll do it again sometime like next week. I'll continue to be in France next week, but we'll figure out a way to get this done. And I will see you then. I'm Eric Rhoads, publisher and founder of PleinAir Magazine. Remember, it's a big world out there, and I'm going to be painting part of that big world this week, so I'm super excited. Any chance I get to paint is a beautiful thing. So you get out there and paint, bring others into plein air painting, because it's life-changing. We'll see you. Bye-bye.
This has been the PleinAir Podcast with PleinAir Magazine's Eric Rhoads. You can help spread the word about plein air painting by sharing this podcast with your friends. And you can leave a review or subscribe on iTunes so it comes to you every week. And you can even reach Eric by email, eric@pleinairmagazine.com. Be sure to pick up our free ebook, 240 plein air painting tips by some of America's top painters. It's free at pleinairtips.com. Tune in next week for more great interviews. Thanks for listening.